We're in the 24th chapter of Matthew, however. I think we're picking up at verse 36 or 37. And we'll finish out Matthew 24, reading-wise, and then get into chapter 25. 25 is parables that Jesus tells, warning us, instructing us to be ready for him to return. And that's what we see a lot of in chapter 25. But we finish out 24 reading about, don't get scared, but I'm going to put my other glasses on. Yeah, I know. These are from Halloween, I think. There he comes. He's got the real ones. Now, I could give you a choice. If you'd rather have these, I'll wear those. Oh, print. It was all just a blur. Matthew 24. Let's pick it up. Well, let's start at verse 32 and kind of get some context. So I need a reader for 32 to 41. Matthew 24, verses 32 to 41. Who will do that? All right, Janie. And then we'll go 42 through, 51. 42 to 51, finish out the chapter. Who's got that? Kirk. All right. And then Bob will get you next time. Okay, let's finish out chapter 24.
From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left.
Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour when you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Very good. Thank you both. How many times are we reading about when Jesus will make an appearance? Two times. The coming of the Son of Man is judgment. In one case, it's a local judgment. In the other case, it's the final judgment. What is the basic message he's trying to get across to those who are hearing him speak and to us as we read this? Be prepared. Be prepared. Obviously, Jerusalem's destruction is past. We don't have to worry about being prepared for Jerusalem's destruction. They were given a few things they could look for so they could see some signs and be warned. It's coming, it's close, it's near. But the final day, Jesus says there won't be any signs. Not even he knows when that day will be. And so it would be a little bit contradictory for him to say, I don't even know when the day is, but here's some signs you can look for. That's not what he does. He doesn't give us any sign to look for regarding the final coming. What he does give us are parables, and he's already started here in verse 45. The faithful and sensible slave, when his master puts him in charge of his household, he better be taking care of his master's business, because what's going to happen? Master's coming back, and when the master comes back, and all of us probably remember this from second or third grade. Teacher leaves the room, and sometimes I think they did it on purpose, and they just stayed out to see how long it would take us to get rowdy, and it wasn't usually very long. Whatever God is doing as he is waiting, Peter tells us why he waits. Do you remember what Peter says? God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. How long ago did Peter write that? Yeah, about 2,000 years. But let's just go to that. I want you to be familiar with that text so that you can understand the compassion of God, the patience of God, the long-suffering of God, because I don't know about you, but when I read back through history and I see all the horrible things that have been done, and a lot of those things that have been done that are horrible are in the name of God, most of them in the name of atheism. People point to the church, and not the Lord's church, but the Catholic Church. Can I say that? The things that the Catholic Church has done in the name of God, and it's nothing Jesus ever told the church to do. And they say, look how evil the church is. But they fail to look at, and here's the real irony in our nation today, so many young people who want to adopt socialism. Socialism was the cause of about 70 million deaths in the last century. Anything associated with Christianity at all has ever come close to that. And so we've got a horrible evil loose in the world, and God has been patient all through this time, not wanting any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. It's one thing to die when a government persecutes you. It's another thing to die and face eternity without Jesus Christ. And that's what God is waiting for people to realize. It's 2 Peter chapter 3, by the way, verse 9. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. So when he tells us this parable about the slave, who's the slave? It's you and me. We are the slaves, and our master has put us in charge of his goods. We're stewards of those things, and he's coming back, and he's going to want to have an accounting. Look at verse 47. Truly I say to you, he'll put him in charge of all his possessions, but if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of the slave will come on a day when he does not expect him. What's Jesus trying to teach us there? When we do not think he will, that's when he will. I remember reading a sermon, and the preacher started asking a question. How many of you think that Jesus is going to come today? Raise your hands. Of course, nobody raised their hands. And then he went to this text that says, he's coming at a time when you do not think he will. I think he made his point. He's not coming at a time when we expect him. What does that also tell us? Doesn't that also tell us that he's not giving us any signs? Because if he gives us signs, then he would be coming on a day when we would know to expect him, because he's given us signs. But when he says, I'm coming on a day when you don't expect it, that obviously indicates there aren't any signs. No signs. He's just going to come. He might come before this class is over. And if he doesn't come in the final judgment, I might drop dead. And I would be facing God. Be kind of awkward in class. Be looking, okay, who's going to finish the rest of this class here? But it's possible. How many people die knowing the moment of their death? I mean, sometimes you can kind of see it coming. That's why we have hospice care and those kinds of things. And when you hear about someone who's on hospice care, they usually have some time frame they're looking at. And even when you're a cancer patient, if it's terminal cancer, your doctor might venture to guess, if you beg for him to do so, how much time do I have, doc? And he might say 6 weeks, 6 months. I remember they gave my aunt 6 months, and she lasted 6 years. Bless their hearts, doctors don't know. But God does. And since we don't know, be ready. Be ready. One breath away, yes. I remember reading about an accident happened over in Yukon many, many years ago. A young man was just riding down the road in his Jeep. Anybody know what a harmonic balancer is? It's a big, ask Steve. Steve knows what a harmonic balancer is, and Billy, it's a big, heavy piece of metal round. It fits on a shaft to help balance the shaft. Crankshaft, yes, the crank comes out the end. Anyway, one of those things came off and bounced across to the other side of the highway where he was driving and just killed him graveyard dead like that. And that kind of thing happens all the time. So be ready. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm just saying, for Christians, wow, pretty good deal. We've got eternity with God waiting for us in a place that Jesus has prepared. And he says, if I'm going to prepare a place for you, what am I going to do? I'm going to come back. And he's already said that to the apostles, and now he's talking about being ready for that time. Any observations or questions you want to make about what we've read here today, this morning? Yes, Don.
Struggled with a lot of the Bible throughout my life.
It's about to get interesting.
When I read through it. And I wholeheartedly agree. I studied Matthew 24. I read North's books. I cut all the notes in my Bibles. And I wholeheartedly agree. There's no signs when we know when the Lord is coming. And verses 4 through 34 are talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And from then on, he has a clear contrast that he's starting to talk about the end of the world. Because before he's talking about those days, he tells us what to do. Get out of the city when you see the abomination of desolation, when you see the army surrounding Jerusalem. Get out of the city because it's about to happen. He's actually given us the sign. He says what signs not to look for, and then he gives the sign what to look for, and he's talking about get out of the city. And he goes through some apocalyptic literature, but we have to keep in view. We've lived in America for the last few decades, very prosperous. And under a country that prayed for us, that we get to live unpersecuted for so long, I don't know if we're ever ready for a persecution. And I don't know that it's going to happen, or if it will happen to us or not, or like you said, we could die. But in light of Revelation 27 through 10, as amillennialists as we are, we believe that is towards the end of time, where it says when 1,000 years are complete, Satan will be loosed to deceive the nations again. Right now, he's tied up, he's loosed, he can deceive here and there, and the church can still thrive. The church can still prosper and preach the gospel and those things. But it appears that in Revelation 7 through 10, and even in Mike Mazzalongo's class, there appears to be the same persecution that the book of Revelation saw against the church. We're not looking for the signs, and it's not going to be the details that he's giving there, because we have that as an instruction to us to say, look, they got through it. They were persecuted to death. They lost their jobs. They did all this. They lived in caves. They were, they didn't get the American dream anymore, so to speak. And and there's gonna be a persecution like that, and all the nations seem to be deceived against Christ's bride, they're gonna surround her, and that's when God's gonna send fire down to destroy everybody, and that's gonna be the end of the world. Now, what does that look like? You know, because we see is like in Second Thessalonians 2:3, some of the commentaries I've read in the Brotherhood talk about risings of evil come over time. We're always seeing risings of evil. And so the man of lawlessness is always rising his head throughout history. So we can almost all follow the beast, so to speak, through history if we chose. We were in Germany when Hitler rose his head, and we decided, well, you know, I'll go ahead and say Heil Hitler, and I'll go ahead and, you know, I don't want to die, you know, and I don't want to lose my job. And, you know, I mean, we could have followed the beast there, or we could have followed the beast of the papacy, kissed the ring of the Pope. And, you know, there's all kinds of things that we could still follow the beast even today, so to speak, not get a physical mark. And I'm not sure if that was even physical in Revelation. They both seem to be figurative, but the point I'm trying to make, without trying to ramble too much, because there's a lot of information when we put the Bible all together, is that we could receive persecution, and there could be a rising of evil that we've never seen before. We don't know. That's 2 cents. You know?
Okay. There was, in the Revelation, there is the beast, and the beast is the persecuting power of Rome, as I see it. And when John writes this, he says in this is chapter 17, and this is just to comment on what you're talking about, not to resolve it, but to add some commentary to it. It says in verse 8 of chapter 17, the Revelation, the beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. I think this is parallel with what we see in chapter 20, when John says that the beast was, that means, in my understanding of this, the beast was persecuting the church. When John wrote this, there wasn't a full-blown persecution of the church. And it's interesting, when Nero died, that persecution basically stopped for a while. But there was a fellow who was going to come back and begin persecuting the church, and that fellow was Domitian. So the beast, the persecuting agent of Rome, was in the person of Nero. When John was writing this, Nero was gone. And when did Nero die? About 68, somewhere. I think it was 68. I should remember that. Probably got it written in here somewhere. Anyway, so the beast was not. And then when John says the beast is about to come up out of the abyss, that means the persecution is going to start again. I think this gives us a pretty good clue into the time frame of when the Revelation was written. A lot of people think it was written about 95, but one of the saints says it was available to be read in 95. But that doesn't mean that's when it was written. I think it was written shortly after Nero died, which would have been probably around AD 70. At any rate, we've got this beast that was, but he is not, but he's coming back. And to me, this is indicative, again, of the church's need to be ready, not just for the final coming of Christ, but for any persecution that might arise, because we don't know when persecution is going to be just around the corner. We really have lived in a heyday in America with the freedoms that we have. I was listening to some news commentary just this week there was about 5 ladies who were journalists, and they were talking about what's happening in Afghanistan and about how horrible the women are treated. They were showing pictures of one lady who was supposedly shot in the street because she wasn't wearing a burqa, and one of those ladies said, "I'm so glad to live in America where I can wear what I want and go where I want, and not." But who knows how much longer those days are lasting? It's kind of exciting. Oh,
June 9th, 68.
68, June 9th. When was his funeral? I missed that. I didn't get that little card. Yeah. Anyway, it's probably in the announcements, but June 9th, 68. Interesting. All right, Google's probably right on that.
He wasn't gonna come back until everybody had the
Oh, you mean until the gospel was preached? Okay, yes.
At least I believe that he's not gonna do it until then, but we have the equipment now, availability, broadcasting on the web. Anybody can get it if they want.
There is that, Bobby's talking about what Jesus said, that the gospel would be preached before Jerusalem would fall, and that's what Paul confirmed in Colossians. Remember when Paul wrote the letter to the church at Colossae, he said twice in the first chapter that the gospel had gone out into the whole world. And in chapter 24, Jesus had said the end of Jerusalem won't come until the gospel's preached to the whole world. And of course, Colossians, that letter was written about AD 60, and Jerusalem fell in AD 7. Isn't that interesting that the gospel goes out into the whole world, and about 10 years later, Jerusalem goes under, totally goes under. Tonight, by the way, if you're willing to come back, I put together a lesson I've been wanting to put together for years of what Josephus says about the fall of Jerusalem and describes it in great detail. And it's interesting that he does this because a lot of cities have fallen through the centuries, but I don't know that any city's fall is documented as well as Jerusalem's is with Josephus. And when you think about what Jesus said in chapter 24, what we just read last week, when Jerusalem falls, it's going to be a time of tribulation like there has never been, nor will there ever be. The horror of Jerusalem is the focal horror of all history, and Jerusalem's fall was recorded in detail by Josephus. That's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Don't bring popcorn. This will not be a fun lesson. There have been points in there when I thought, I'm just going to add some levity to kind of break the tension because this is going to be heavy stuff. But I didn't do that. Some of it would be almost, well, anyway, I didn't do it. Steve.
We need to remember, I think, that Christ said that if you're a Christian, you're going to be persecuted. Okay? So every generation faces persecution, and we tend to think of physical, like Rome and things like that. But the persecution that has been in the church, against the church in America through the heyday that we mentioned, might be the persecution of within the church of false doctrine, apathy, those things that make us drift and people leave. Well, they may be leaving in the same numbers as physical persecution because what has happened in the church. I'm just saying that each generation will face some type of persecution.
Right. When you try to hold to the standard of godliness that's laid out in scriptures, it's not going to be welcomed so much in this world. It will in some quarters, but for the most part, you're going to be an outsider. You're going to be an outcast. And that's why we've really been blessed in America, because people have recognized in the past that we are a quote-unquote Christian nation. And if anybody would deny that, and you're talking to them, and, oh, we're not a Christian nation, we never were a Christian nation, tell them to go back and read the Declaration of Independence. How many times in the Declaration of Independence is the God of the Bible mentioned? 4 times. 4 times those guys wrote into the Declaration, and there wouldn't have been any mistaking who they were talking about when they talk about the supreme ruler of the universe and the judge of all the earth. That was the God of the Bible. Now, if any other nation had laid out a document declaring their independence, and in that document mentioned Buddha 4 times, what would you say about that nation religiously they were probably going to be? Well, going to be Buddhist, duh. They've got Buddha mentioned 4 times in their Declaration of Independence. If Allah was mentioned 4 times, we would naturally think, well, it's going to be an Islamic nation. If Krishna, I remember when I was a teenager listening to George Harrison sing, "Oh, my Lord, my sweet Lord." And I thought, oh, yeah, I got a sweet Lord too. But he wasn't singing about the same Lord I was. He was singing about Lord Krishna. How many of you knew that? All you dope heads from the 70s, see? Singing about, singing about Lord Krishna. Didn't even know it. You got to be careful about that stuff, what we sing, because he was singing about a completely different God. At any rate, I don't know how I got off on that, but a flower. Man, I remember going through the airport and having those folks offer me flowers, and I challenged one anyway and got in a fight right there in the airport. I was really nice, but anyway. Yeah, you believe that, don't you? Anyway, what were we talking about? I don't even know. It's good discussion. Go back to Matthew 24. And this continual reminder from Jesus to stay faithful carries through all of what we've been talking about, regardless of what kind of persecution we may endure, what kind of difficulty we may endure, even if it's the difficulty of just trying to maintain the truth when other people are saying, no, this is what Christianity is, it's this belief over here. No, this is what Christianity is, it's this practice over here. And we're trying to say, well, that's not what the Bible says, and we're trying to go by what the Bible says. Even that does not get met with rounds of applause everywhere you go. So, chapter 25, let's do a little reading in 25 if we're ready. Who's got 1 through 13? Oh, Bob, you were going to read a while ago. You still ready to read? All right, 1 through 13. And then, let's just do 1 through 13 for now.
The kingdom of heaven will be compared to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were prudent. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. Now when the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight there was a shout, "Behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the prudent, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the prudent answered, "No, there will not be enough for us and you too. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. Later the other virgins also came, saying, "Lord, Lord, open for us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour."
Very good. Thank you, Bob. So this parable means that only half the people in the world will be saved when the Lord returns, right? Proper interpretation? Wouldn't that be great if half would make it? That's not what this parable's saying. What is it saying? It's saying the ones that are ready will make it. It may be 5 out of 10. It may be 1 out of 1,000. It may be 1 out of 1,000,000. If we're talking numbers, how many were saved on the ark? 8. Now, there's a lot of speculation. Nobody knew. God didn't give us a number how many people existed on the earth, but we can safely assume there were a lot more than 8 people. Of the now I'm forgetting my numbers. Was it over 300,000 fighting men that came out of Exodus, or came out of Egypt in the Exodus? Okay. How many of those made it into the promised land? 2. Not even Moses went into the promised land. So God is not as concerned with numbers as he is with righteousness. He is a God of justice. And that's one thing we have to keep reminding ourselves about the final coming. God is not coming for churchy people. He's coming for his children who are found righteous by his son's blood. Those are the ones he's coming for. And it's not going to be based on our goodness. It's going to be based simply on our faith in him, which is really a very encouraging thing. If it was based on my goodness, I wouldn't make it. I'd be saying, my goodness, ironically, but oh my goodness. Well, no, You don't have any goodness. Isn't that funny the way we say that sometimes? Oh my goodness. What goodness? Jesus said no man is good. Anyway, maybe we'll talk about that a little more in the sermon today. So, why weren't these wise virgins generous enough to lend oil to the ones that were foolish? Got to have your oil to be prepared. That's, sometimes we want to bisect and dissect parables to the nth degree, but that's not the point. Their lack of generosity is not the point. They were prepared. There wasn't any way they could share their preparedness with their others in the sense we're talking about here. You either are prepared or you are not, and you can't come in on the coattails of anybody else. And the 5 that were not prepared went away, and we can read this and think, well, somebody might miss the judgment and come in late. No, nobody's going to come in late. That's not the point of the parable. The singular point of the parable is, be ready. You do not know when the bridegroom is coming. Have oil and have extra oil in the sense that you be faithful and you plan to stay faithful. That's what this parable is really all about. Sometimes we want to make things a little more complicated than they are. I've been guilty of doing that, and it's so much easier to just say that's the point of the parable, and there's really not much more. And when he comes, what is it when he comes? It's judgment, and it is too late. It is too late. A lot of folks, I think, have this idea, well, I'll just wait, and right before he comes somehow, I'll do it. And it's just like when you're going down the street and you see that light and you know, oh, it's going to turn yellow, but it won't turn yellow before I get to it. And then it turns red. Have you ever had that happen? Go straight from green to red? I have. It's like, I wish I could pull that off the street and put it in a sermon, because that's a good indication of the way judgment's going to be. Everything's green, everything's looking good. We're given in marriage and all other things Jesus is talking about, and then boom, the trumpet sounds. It's judgment day. Too late to do anything else. You got to be ready right then. Almost. You persuaded me to be a Christian. Let's see. Yes.
To me on the gravestone, born and dash dead. Have you ever noticed the little dash is not very long?
Yeah. And no matter how long it is.
Some people may live 90, 100 years. That seems like a long time to us, but that dash is really not that long.
Ask an old person how long life is. I remember Carthel. I don't know how many of you remember Carthel. He used to talk about these old people. He was a hoot. Even when you're old, you're not that old. All right, verse 14. Let's break it up into a couple of sections, 14 to 21. Who will take that? All right, Jamie. And then 22 down to 30. Anybody for 22 to 30? Oh, I see a hand in the back. Is that Rich? All right.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, and another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received 5 talents went and traded them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug a hole in the ground and hid the Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought the 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over the few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord.
The man with the 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, or gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, there is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken away from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
All right, thank you very much. We got 3 servants. How does the master decide what to give each one of them? It's according to their ability, whatever he knows they are able to work with. So one guy gets 5, one guy gets 2, and one guy gets 1. But even the guy who got 1 got that 1 based on his ability to use that 1. So this is not a fault of ability, it's a fault in character. The 2 guys that got the most, what they do? They took what God had given them and they put it to work and they created more. And I remember when I was young, I would read this and I would think, well, that's not fair. The guy that had 5 talents to start with, he shouldn't have got 5 more. That should have gone to the other guy to kind of make it even. That's because I was young and I didn't know anything about production. If you're trying to produce something that's good, who do you give the most resources to? You give the most resources to whoever is producing the most good. And that's true in any regard. If you've just got a piece of ground, well, say you got 2 pieces of ground and you plant corn on both of them, and one you got spindly little old dried up corn stalks coming up, bent over. The other one you got big green, tall, vibrant ears of corn stalks as high. How high in Oklahoma? As an elephant's eye. Corn is as high as an elephant's eye. You need to go watch that show if you haven't seen that. Rodgers and Hammerstein, I think. Is that? Anyway, I digress. But you look at your crops and you go, wow, I think I'm going to forget this piece of ground and I'm going to work with this piece of ground over here that's producing the corn. You got somebody's working for you and they're really doing great. Somehow they're on fire and you can't really tell why, but you know they're producing more than the other. Well, he's the one you put your resources into. You don't put your resources into the one that's not doing well unless you somehow see some potential that they will do better. But Jesus is not working with that. So what about the guy who hides the money? Why did he hide the money? Why did he say he hid it? He was afraid. Now, he says he hid it because he's afraid, but what does the master say of him? Yeah. Wicked, lazy. Not afraid, wicked, lazy. Back to the Revelation, chapter 21, verse 8. What's that passage famous for? It's famous for liars go to hell. You've heard that song, Revelation, Revelation, 21:8, 21:8, liars go to hell, burn, 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 burn. So now you've learned a new song in church this morning, if you didn't already know that. Now, that's where Jesus provides John with a list of all those who are not going to be in the kingdom. But who does the list start with? It ends with liars, but who does the list start with? Go back and read it. If I'm not mistaken, the cowardly. The cowardly. Now, we might think, oh, the poor cowardly people. God does not think poor cowardly people. Everything God has ever done is to bring about faith in his people. And so when we are cowardly, we're simply faithless. That's what cowardly is. That's why God could look at someone who says, I was afraid, and say, no, you're wicked. You're wicked and you're lazy. That's the difference between the viewpoints. So that guy didn't do what he was supposed to because he was wicked and he was lazy. He says he was afraid, but he was wicked and he was lazy. And he wasn't ready when the master came back. All right, I guess that means we got to quit. All right, so we weren't ready for that to end, were we? All right, Don.
I might add in verse 24, and sometimes, I know that I'm guilty of much of what was said here. And so sometimes another confession, I may be trying to justify myself, but I might add that in 24, he also said, you're a hard man, which indicates he's what I might note here is over-demanding, maybe even heartless. And so, it's almost like you're a hard man, over-demanding, which I don't think some of us who realize maybe we've been lazy in areas on what we should be doing, or maybe even afraid to do things we feel like we should be doing. My only hope is that I confess those to God.
Right.
And so, I know that when I wrestle with my fears, and maybe even let them hold me back, all I know to do is I hope it's not a cop-out, is to tell God, hey, if you want to get me to a certain point, you need to get me there, because I can't overcome this by myself.
Right. I think there's a parallel because I always thought my mom was a hard case. Why did I think that? Because she always made me do the right thing. Man, why are you got to be so hard on me? Well, she wasn't being hard on me. She was being right on me. She was demanding that I live up to my potential, which is what the master was doing here. He's demanding that these guys live up to their potential. You don't live up to your potential. It's not because you poor little thing, you're just afraid. It's because you're wicked and you're lazy. You have the means, and you've chosen not to. And that's why I think what you're saying is so important, that we all understand we've got to go to God with our sin, our infirmity, our weakness, our laziness. I was just reading it yesterday again, and this just really struck me in Genesis chapter 8. Yeah, it's a long way back, I know, but I think it's a long way back for a reason. God says this, Noah is off the boat, and he built an altar there in verse 20, took of every clean animal, and he offered up burnt sacrifices. And it says in verse 21 of Genesis 8, the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I'll never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. Just a brief statement, but what he says characterizes each one of us. The intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. And he doesn't say that but it's going to change one of these days, and people are going to get better. No, they're not. And he says that knowing I'm going to send my son eventually to die for these people whose hearts are evil from their youth. That's us. That's me. That's you. And that's why what Don says is so important. Thank you. Appreciate it.